My name is Stella, 33 years old, and I am a forensic accountant who just orchestrated the most ruthless financial takedown my family has ever seen. It all started at a fancy family dinner where my parents handed my younger sister a $30,000 check for a luxury cruise and then slid a single $1 scratch-off lottery ticket across the table to me as a joke. They wanted to humiliate me. What they did not know was that the single dollar ticket was a $200 million jackpot winner, and when they finally found out, I had 80 missed calls and the absolute power to ruin their lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who grossly underestimated your worth. The smell of expensive roasted garlic and seared ribeye filled the private dining room. It was supposed to be a joint birthday dinner for me and my younger sister Brittany, who had just turned 30. I sat quietly near the edge of the long mahogany table nursing my sparkling water. As a forensic accountant, my life was built on logic and quiet observation. To my family, that just meant I was the boring spinster sister who never measured up. My mother Diane stood up and tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. She beamed a radiant smile directly at Brittany. Brittany sat there adjusting her perfect hair, already holding her phone up to record. To my beautiful girls, my mother began, though her eyes never left Brittany. Birthdays are a time to celebrate milestones. Brittany, you and DeAndre have had such a stressful year building your brand. Your father and I wanted to give you something truly special. My father Thomas proudly handed a crisp envelope to Brittany. She tore it open and gasped loudly, making sure her camera caught her reaction. It was a check for $30,000, a Mediterranean luxury cruise, my mother announced. 3 weeks of pampering across the Amalfi Coast and Santorini. You deserve the world, sweetheart. Brittany squealed and kissed my mother. Her husband DeAndre clapped his hands. DeAndre was a flashy guy, always bragging about his crypto investments. He grinned broadly, soaking up the lavish gift. Then my mother turned to me. Her warm smile dropped into a tight, condescending smirk. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small square of cardboard. She placed it flat on the table and pushed it toward me. It stopped next to my glass. It was a single $1 Mega Millions scratch-off lottery ticket. And for our practical Stella, my mother said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness, we know you do not like flashy things. So we thought we would give you a little bit of hope instead. Maybe you will win $10 and can treat yourself to a nice lunch. Laughter erupted around the table. It was a loud, cruel laugh led entirely by DeAndre. He leaned back in his chair, pointing at the cheap ticket. Hey, do not look so down, Stella, DeAndre mocked loudly. With that boring accountant salary of yours, you definitely need the luck a lot more than we do. If you win big, maybe you can finally upgrade that ancient sedan you drive. Or buy a personality. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I kept my face entirely blank. I looked across the table and saw Brittany pointing her phone camera directly at me. The recording light was blinking red. She was capturing my humiliation for a TikTok draft. My father just sat there swirling his scotch, not saying a single word to defend me. They expected me to cry or storm out so they could call me dramatic. Instead, I calmly picked up the cheap lottery ticket and carefully slipped it into my purse. I offered a polite, totally flat smile. Thank you, Mother, I said softly. I will be right back. I need to use the restroom. I stood up and walked out of the private room, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I walked down the dimly lit hallway into the luxurious women restroom and locked the stall door behind me. I opened my purse and pulled out the cheap dollar ticket. I grabbed a shiny silver quarter from my leather wallet. My heart was pounding a slow rhythm against my ribs. I scraped the silver foil off the 6 boxes. First number matched, second number matched, third, fourth, fifth. The final bonus number was a perfect match. I blinked, staring at the harsh bathroom lighting reflecting off the cardboard. I had just quietly won $200 million. I stared at the cardboard square until the silver dust settled on my fingertips. $200 million. The numbers blurred, and for a terrifying second I thought my mind was playing a cruel trick on me. I rubbed my eyes and took a deep breath of the perfumed bathroom air. One by one, I matched the printed digits against the winning sequence I had memorized from the morning news. They were flawless. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I leaned against the cold tile stall and pressed my hand over my mouth to stop a gasp from escaping. As a forensic accountant, I spent my life untangling numbers and finding hidden assets. I knew exactly what this money meant. It was not just wealth. It was absolute power. It was the key to my cage. I carefully wiped the silver residue from the ticket with my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it into the sink. I wrapped the winning ticket inside a clean tissue and placed it into the hidden compartment of my leather wallet. I looked at myself in the mirror. My cheeks were flushed and my eyes were wide with pure shock. I splashed cold water on my face and forced my muscles to relax. I practiced my usual unbothered expression. Nobody could know. If my family discovered I held a ticket worth $200 million, their mocking laughter would turn into greedy demands. They would tear me apart. I smoothed down my skirt and walked back down the dimly lit hallway toward the private dining room. When I pushed the door open, the atmosphere hit me. Brittany was posing for a selfie with the $30,000 cruise check. DeAndre was loudly ordering another bottle of champagne, bragging about his crypto portfolio. My mother Diane was clapping her hands, completely enchanted by her golden child. I quietly slipped back into my seat. Nobody even asked if I was all right. They barely noticed I had returned. "Did you scratch your ticket?" Stella, my father Thomas, asked, not looking up from his steak. "Try not to spend your whole dollar in one place." I offered a flat, practiced smile. "It was a dud," I said softly. "Better luck next time." DeAndre let out a booming laugh. "Shocker," he mocked. "Looks like you are stuck crunching numbers for the rest of your life, Stella. Maybe you can do our taxes for free this year to make yourself useful." I simply picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a slow sip. The secret burned in my pocket, a glorious hidden fire. The dinner finally began to wind down. The waiter entered the room carrying a sleek black leather folder and placed it directly in the center of the table. The total bill was $800. Thomas cleared his throat, patted his suit jacket pockets, and put on a spectacular performance of looking confused. "Oh, would you look at that?" Thomas said, sighing dramatically. "I must have left my wallet in my other jacket." Diane immediately looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Stella, be a dear and cover the bill," she commanded. "We just gave your sister a $30,000 gift. It is the least you can do to chip in for family." DeAndre smirked, crossing his arms. "Yeah, Stella, do not be stingy on your own birthday. They always found a way to make me pay financially and emotionally. Normally this would spark a quiet rage. $800 was a huge dent in my budget. But tonight, as the wallet containing $200 million rested against my side, the amount felt like absolute pennies. I did not argue or sigh. I simply pulled out my credit card, handed it to the waiter, and signed the receipt without a single word. My parents looked slightly disappointed that I did not fight. They fed on my frustration, and tonight I starved them. The ride home was silent. I walked through my front door, and the silence felt like freedom. It was a small, cramped space, but it was entirely mine. I placed my keys on the counter and kicked off my stiff work heels. I sank onto my old, worn sofa, letting the exhaustion of the night finally wash over me. Suddenly, my phone buzzed sharply against the cushion. A text from Diane read, "Stella, the dinner went over budget. Send me $500 by tomorrow morning. Do not make me ask twice." I stared at the bright phone screen. I reached into my purse and carefully pulled out the cardboard square. I looked at the demanding text, then looked at the ticket worth $200 million, and simply deleted the entire text message without a single second of hesitation. The next morning, I did something I had never done in my entire 8-year career. I called out sick. I did not wear my usual sensible gray suit. I dressed in dark jeans, a simple black turtleneck, and a trench coat. I put on oversized sunglasses and took a private car directly to the financial district of downtown. I bypassed the standard accounting firms and walked straight into the towering glass lobby of a top-tier wealth management law firm. As a forensic accountant, I knew exactly who to hire when you needed money to completely disappear. I sat in a high-tech conference room across from a senior partner named Jonathan. I placed the cardboard ticket on the polished mahogany table. He verified the numbers, and his professional demeanor cracked into a massive grin. I did not smile back. I gave him strict, immediate orders. I wanted the lump sum payout, which came to about $90 million after federal and state taxes. But more importantly, I wanted absolute bulletproof anonymity. Depending on the state lottery, winners can be forced to reveal their identities to the public. However, I knew the legal loophole. Jonathan immediately drafted the paperwork to establish an anonymous, limited liability company and a blind trust. I named the trust the Silver Quarter Foundation. By claiming the ticket through the trust, my name would never appear on a single public record or news press release. The Lottery Commission would simply issue a massive check to the LLC, and the money would quietly funnel into my new offshore protected accounts. It was the ultimate legal fortress. While Jonathan and his team rushed to file the expedited paperwork, my phone started vibrating relentlessly in my coat pocket. It was the family group chat. The notifications lit up my screen one after another. Brittany was sending frantic messages. "Stella, I need you at my house right now," she texted. "I have to pack for my Mediterranean cruise, and I need you to organize my outfits and make a spreadsheet for my itinerary. Mom says you took the day off work, so you have no excuse. Get over here and bring iced lattes." I stared at the messages. She was going on a $30,000 vacation paid for by my parents, and she still expected me to act as her unpaid personal assistant. A few minutes later, Diane chimed into the chat. "Stella, do not ignore your sister. You owe me $500 from last night, and you owe Brittany your help today. Stop being so selfish." I turned my phone on silent and placed it face down on the table. For 33 years, I had folded myself into tiny boxes to make them comfortable. I had accepted their insults, covered their bills, and swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. But today, the dynamic was officially dead. I spent the next several hours signing stacks of non-disclosure agreements, banking forms, and asset protection contracts. Jonathan explained how the wealth management team would diversify the $90 million into low-risk bonds index funds and high-yield real estate trusts. By the time I left the towering glass building, the sun was beginning to set over the city skyline. I felt different. The heavy, invisible weight I had carried my entire life was completely gone. I took a luxury black car back to my cramped apartment. I walked inside and looked around at the cheap furniture and peeling paint. I would not be living here much longer. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and sat on my worn-out sofa, waiting for the final confirmation. At exactly 7 in the evening, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim room. I answered it immediately. "Congratulations, Stella," Jonathan said, his voice echoing slightly over the secure line. "The Lottery Commission has processed the claim through the LLC. The wire transfer has officially cleared. $90 million is sitting safely in your private trust account. You are entirely untraceable and fully liquid." I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "Thank you, Jonathan," I replied, keeping my voice completely steady. "I will be in touch tomorrow to discuss our next strategic moves." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me. I was a multi-millionaire. I was completely free. I picked up my wine glass, ready to take my first sip of true independence. Suddenly, someone began pounding aggressively on my apartment door. The heavy thuds shook the cheap wood and rattled the deadbolt. "Open the door!" Stella, a deep, angry voice shouted from the hallway. "I know you are in there right now, so open up immediately, you coward." I walked slowly toward the front door, listening to the frantic pounding echoing through my small living room. I looked through the peephole and was genuinely surprised by what I saw. It was DeAndre. But he did not look like the arrogant crypto investment guru who had mercilessly mocked me at the steakhouse just 24 hours ago. His designer suit jacket was heavily wrinkled, his tie was completely undone, and sweat was pouring down his forehead. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a few inches. Before I could even ask what he wanted, DeAndre shoved his body against the wood, forcing his way inside my apartment. I stumbled backward, watching him frantically lock the door behind him. He paced back and forth across my cheap rug, breathing heavily like a hunted animal. "What are you doing, DeAndre?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You cannot just force your way into my home." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. The smug, confident facade was completely gone. His eyes were wide with pure panic. "I need your help, Stella," he stammered, wiping the sweat from his face with a trembling hand. "You are an accountant. You understand numbers and credit scores and all that financial garbage. I need you to do me a massive favor right now." I crossed my arms and stared at him. "I am a forensic accountant, DeAndre," I corrected him calmly. "And I do not do favors for people who humiliate me in public. Tell me why you are sweating in my living room, or get out immediately." He swallowed hard, looking nervously at my locked door before speaking. "My fund collapsed," he blurted out. "The crypto market tanked last night and I got margin called. Everything is gone, Stella. The cars, the watches, the accounts. It is all completely wiped out. But that is not even the worst part. I borrowed money to try and cover the losses. Private lenders. Dangerous people who do not care about the law. They are demanding $50,000 by the end of the week, or they are going to come after me." I watched him closely. The husband of my sister, the man who bragged about his massive wealth, was standing in my apartment begging for his life. But instead of showing genuine humility, his tone quickly shifted back to entitlement. "I found a high-risk loan company that will give me the $50,000, he continued, stepping closer to me. "But my credit is temporarily frozen because of the margin calls. I need a co-signer. You have perfect credit, Stella. You have no debt and no life. I need you to sign these loan documents right now. It is your duty as family to help us." I looked at the crumpled papers he pulled from his jacket pocket. He was asking me to tie my perfect financial record to a $50,000 high-interest loan to pay off illegal loan sharks. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "I am not signing anything. You dug this hole yourself and you can dig yourself out. You and Brittany have been living a fake life for years. Do not try to make your financial ruin my problem." DeAndre slammed his fist onto my kitchen counter, making my cheap coffee mugs rattle. "You selfish witch!" he screamed, his face turning purple with rage. "We are family. Diane and Thomas just spent $30,000 on a luxury cruise for us. They take care of their own. You are the only one who refuses to be a team player. If you do not sign this paper right now, I swear to you I will tell Diane and Thomas everything. I will tell them you slammed the door in my face while my life was in danger. They will disown you, Stella. They will completely cut you out of the family forever. You will be entirely alone." I looked at him and let out a short, hollow laugh. The threat of being disowned by people I already despised was absolutely comical, especially when I had $90 million sitting safely waiting for me. "Get out of my apartment, DeAndre," I said, pointing directly at the door. "If you do not leave now, I am calling the police." He stared angrily but saw the dead seriousness in my eyes. He grabbed his loan documents and stormed out, slamming the door violently behind him. My hands were completely steady. I walked over to my desk and opened my secure work laptop. I logged directly into my encrypted forensic accounting databases to dig deeply into where DeAndre and my parents actually got all their dirty money right now. My fingers flew across the keyboard as the glow of the laptop screen illuminated my dark living room. Forensic accounting is not just about crunching boring numbers. It is about following the hidden digital footprints people leave behind when they think nobody is watching. I started my search with DeAndre. A sweep of public business registries and court filings confirmed everything he had confessed. His crypto fund was not just bankrupt, it was a criminal enterprise. He had multiple liens against him and a trail of unpaid contractors. But DeAndre was an idiot. I expected him to ruin his life, but I did not expect what I found when investigating my parents. Diane and Thomas always projected perfect wealth. They hosted country club dinners, drove leased cars, and bragged about their stock portfolios. I pulled up their credit reports and property records through my terminal. The reality was pathetic. They were drowning in debt. Their credit cards were maxed and savings accounts empty. So how did they manage to hand Brittany a $30,000 check for a Mediterranean cruise? Money does not just materialize. I cross-referenced bank deposits with real estate records. It took me 20 minutes to find the glaring red flag. A knot formed in my stomach as I clicked open a newly filed deed. 3 weeks ago, my parents had taken out a second mortgage. But they did not take it out on their own perfectly manicured colonial home. They took it out on my late grandfather's house. My grandfather was the only person in my family who ever truly loved me. When he passed away 5 years ago, he left his beautiful, historic property directly to my father and me. The deed explicitly stated a 50-50 ownership split. It was his way of ensuring I always had a financial safety net, because he knew exactly how my parents treated me. Legally, neither my father nor I could sell the house, borrow against it, or alter the deed without the explicit written consent and notarized signature of the other person. I stared blankly at the glowing screen. The newly approved loan was for exactly $50,000. The bank had approved the second mortgage and deposited the funds into my parents' joint checking account just days before our joint birthday dinner. They had mortgaged the only piece of genuine family legacy I had left just to fund Brittany's lavish European vacation and keep up their wealthy facade. But the math did not make sense. I never signed a single piece of paper authorizing a second mortgage. I never spoke to a loan officer. I never sat in front of a notary public. My heart began to beat with a slow, dangerous rhythm as I navigated to the county clerk portal and paid the digital fee to download the full 60-page loan packet. The heavy document loaded onto my screen. I scrolled slowly past the bank disclosures, the truth in lending statements, and the property appraisals. I stopped dead on page 42, the final signature page. There it was in black and white. My printed name Stella next to a signature that was a near-perfect replica of my own cursive handwriting. Below it was the official stamp of a shady local notary public whose license I immediately flagged for further investigation. My mother and father had forged my signature. They had committed identity theft to drain the equity out of my inheritance. I leaned back in my desk chair and let out a dry, hollow laugh. The sheer audacity of their actions was staggering. They had robbed me in secret and then publicly humiliated me by tossing a $1 lottery ticket in my face. They thought I was so beaten down, so completely passive and weak, that I would never check the property records or challenge their authority. But as a senior forensic accountant, I knew exactly what they had done. This was not just a toxic family betrayal or a sleazy financial trick. Forging a signature on a bank loan document to secure tens of thousands of dollars is federal mortgage fraud. It is a severe felony. It carries a mandatory prison sentence. They had practically handed me the ultimate weapon to completely destroy them and tear down their fake world. I downloaded the entire loan packet, saved the files to an encrypted external hard drive, and printed 3 physical copies. I placed the forged signature page right next to my newly acquired $90 million trust account confirmation. My parents and my sister genuinely thought they were the untouchable apex predators in this family. They had absolutely no idea they had just walked blindly into a devastating legal trap of their own making, and I would snap it shut. I returned to my office at the accounting firm the following morning, acting as if absolutely nothing had changed. I wore my usual gray suit and poured myself a cup of terrible break room coffee. I sat at my desk and organized my spreadsheets. Nobody looking at me would suspect that I was now worth $90 million in liquid cash, or that I held the federal evidence required to send my own parents to a federal penitentiary. I simply waited. I knew it was only a matter of time before the Lottery Commission released the preliminary details to the press. They never reveal the winner if a blind trust is used, but they always reveal the location where the golden ticket was purchased. At exactly 10 in the morning, the breaking news alert flashed across the monitors in our office lobby. I watched the screen through the glass walls of my cubicle. The local news anchor looked directly into the camera with an excited smile. The $200 million Mega Millions jackpot has officially been claimed, she announced brightly. The single winning ticket was sold right here in our local suburb. The broadcast cut to a live reporter standing in front of a small rundown gas station. I recognized the cracked pavement and the faded red awning immediately. It was the exact gas station my father Thomas visited every single Sunday morning. It was his religious weekend routine. He would buy his black coffee, a newspaper, and a handful of cheap scratch-off tickets to hand out as joke gifts or use as stocking stuffers. The reporter continued speaking, pointing at the glass doors of the convenience store. The store owner will receive a massive bonus for selling the winning ticket, the reporter said. And while the winner has chosen to remain completely anonymous through a legal trust, the Lottery Commission has confirmed the winning numbers. The anchor back in the studio nodded, and an oversized graphic appeared on the screen flashing the 6 lucky numbers: 12, 8, 19, 54, 30, and the bonus number 22. I stared at the numbers glowing on the television screen. I knew those numbers intimately. My father did not just buy a random quick pick ticket. He had specifically chosen those exact numbers using our family birth dates. 12 for December, the month my mother was born. 8 for the day Brittany was born. 19 for the year my grandfather started his business. 54 for my father's age. 30 for the day I was born. And 22 for the date of my parents' wedding anniversary. He had deliberately selected those deeply personal numbers, printed them onto a cheap $1 ticket, and then slid that exact ticket across a steakhouse table to publicly mock my entire existence. I sat perfectly still at my desk, visualizing the exact scene unfolding at my parents' house at that very moment. I knew Thomas was sitting in his leather recliner, holding his morning cup of coffee, watching the exact same broadcast. I could imagine the blood draining completely out of his face. I could picture him dropping his coffee mug on Diane's perfectly vacuumed carpet. I could see him frantically doing the mental math. He would remember going to that exact gas station. He would remember filling out the little paper slip with all of our family birth dates. And then the horrifying, crushing realization would finally hit him. He had purchased a lottery ticket worth $200 million, and he had given it away to the daughter he despised just to get a cheap laugh at a birthday dinner. The sheer psychological agony he must have been experiencing was intoxicating to think about. He thought he was giving me a worthless piece of cardboard. Instead, he had handed me an empire. The silence in my office felt heavy and electric. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me. I checked my encrypted drive to ensure the forged mortgage documents were safely locked away. Everything was perfectly in place. I was a ghost holding all the cards, and they were about to realize they had surrendered their entire kingdom. They were about to realize that the person they abused had total control over their future. I placed my mug down on my desk. On cue, the dead silence of my workspace was abruptly shattered. My cell phone, resting face up next to my keyboard, suddenly began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with a blinding brightness. The caller identification flashed across the glass. It was Thomas. Before the first ring could even finish, a second call beeped through. It was Diane, then Brittany. The screen began flashing rapidly, jumping between their names in frantic rhythm. My phone vibrated against the sleek mahogany surface of my office desk. It had been vibrating constantly for the past 4 hours. I did not even have to look at the screen to know who was calling. My mother, my father, and my sister Diane were taking turns blowing up my phone, their desperation practically radiating through the device. I sipped my coffee, returning my attention to the financial projections. The quiet hum of the air conditioning contrasted with the absolute chaos unfolding back at my parents' house. By noon, my screen displayed 80 missed calls and exactly 150 unhinged text messages. I finally picked up the device, unlocking it with a calm swipe of my thumb. The messages painted a vivid picture of a family completely unraveling. My mother's initial texts attempted to maintain her tone of false authority. "Stella, come back here immediately. We are not finished discussing this." A few minutes later, my father chimed in with his classic manipulation tactics. "You are overreacting as usual. Bring the documents back so we can sort this out like a family." As the morning progressed and my silence stretched on the facade completely crumbled, the text shifted from demands to threats, revealing the raw, ugly panic beneath. "You cannot do this to us," my mother wrote just before 11. "We raised you. We provided for you. You owe us this." Then came Diane's texts arriving in rapid succession, a barrage of pure rage. "You selfish brat. How dare you steal what belongs to me? You always ruin everything." I scrolled through the vitriol, feeling a profound sense of detachment. The girl who used to cry over their harsh words was gone. The woman sitting in this corner office found their panic almost clinical to observe. They had operated under the assumption that I was weak, that I would always fold under their pressure, that I would hand over all my assets just to buy a fraction of their conditional love. They had miscalculated terribly. A new notification popped up, a voicemail from Diane. I tapped the play button and put the phone on speaker, resting it back on the desk. My sister's voice filled the quiet office, shrill and completely unhinged. She was not just crying, she was screaming, the sound tearing through the speaker with raw ferocity. "Stella, you listen to me right now. You have no right to walk away with that. That is our family ticket. You bring it back right now, or you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead to us?" The voicemail ended with a sharp click, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. "Dead to us." I repeated the words softly, letting them hang in the air. For 30 years, being cut off from this family had been my greatest fear. It was the ultimate threat they held over my head, the invisible leash they used to yank me back into line whenever I dared to step out. Now, hearing Diane scream it with such desperation, I realized the threat held absolutely no power over me anymore. They were not cutting me off. I had already cut them out. I picked up the phone again, but not to reply to them. I dialed the internal extension for my executive assistant, Sarah. She answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes, Stella." "Sarah," I said, my voice steady and measured. "I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the afternoon. Cancel the marketing review and push the vendor negotiations to next Tuesday." "Consider it done," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly fine," I assured her. "But I have one more priority task for you. I need you to contact Vanguard Security Group. I want to hire a private around-the-clock security detail starting immediately. I need 2 guards at my residence, 1 for the office lobby, and a personal driver for my daily commute. I want them briefed on 3 individuals who are not permitted near my properties. I will have the contract drafted and the team deployed within the hour," Sarah said efficiently. She never asked unnecessary questions, which was exactly why I hired her. I ended the call and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, turning my gaze to the tall glass windows overlooking the city skyline. My family thought they could bully me into submission. They thought they could show up at my doorstep, scream demands, and take what was mine. They were about to learn that the quiet and obedient daughter they thought they knew had been replaced by a woman who fortified her boundaries with concrete and steel. My peace lasted exactly 47 minutes. I was reviewing a tax strategy when a sudden commotion shattered the silence of the accounting firm. Raised voices echoed from reception, followed by a heavy door forcefully slamming open. Sarah shouted in protest, but her voice was drowned out by rapid footsteps charging down the corridor. Before I could reach the phone to call security, my office doors were violently shoved apart. Diane stormed in, her face flush red. Right behind her was my brother-in-law Thomas, looking enraged, and my nephew DeAndre, whose arrogant swagger was replaced by frantic desperation. They had bypassed lobby security, slipping into the elevator behind clients. Now they stood in my organized workspace, tracking toxic chaos onto my pristine carpets. "You thought you could just ignore us!" Diane shrieked, her voice bouncing off the acoustic panels. She slammed her hands down on my mahogany desk, scattering my arranged financial reports. "You do not get to walk away from us, Stella. You do not get to steal our future and sit here playing the big shot executive." I slowly closed my laptop, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I did not steal anything, Diane. I took back what was mine. Now lower your voice and leave my office before I have you arrested for trespassing." Thomas stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. "Cut the corporate attitude, Stella. We know you still have the ticket. Hand it over right now. We are a family and that money belongs to all of us. You are not going to ruin everything we have planned just because you are throwing a selfish little tantrum." "A selfish tantrum?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You mean my refusal to fund your delusions of grandeur?" DeAndre could no longer contain himself. He pushed past his parents, his face contorted with panic. "You do not understand," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I have massive debts. The dealership is calling my loans. The bank is foreclosing on the condo. If I do not get my share of that money today, I am going bankrupt. You are letting me go bankrupt. Your financial mismanagement is not my responsibility, DeAndre," I stated coldly. "I will not light my own future on fire to keep you warm." The sheer indifference in my voice was the spark that ignited the powder keg. DeAndre let out a primal roar of frustration. His eyes locked onto my designer leather tote bag resting on the edge of the credenza. In a split second, he lunged across the room, his large hands reaching out to grab my bag, clearly convinced the winning ticket was tucked inside. He never made it past the corner of my desk. The heavy oak door to my office had remained open, and the Vanguard security detail Sarah had secured just 30 minutes prior had already arrived on the floor. Two massive men in tailored dark suits materialized from the hallway with terrifying speed. The first guard intercepted DeAndre mid-lunge, grabbing him by the shoulders and using the boy's own momentum against him. With a swift, practiced motion, the guard violently tackled DeAndre to the floor. The impact shook the glass walls of the office. DeAndre slammed into the carpet face first, crying out in shock and pain as the guard pinned his arms sharply behind his back, placing a heavy knee squarely between his shoulder blades. The second guard immediately stepped between me and my horrified sister, his hand resting firmly on the taser at his belt. "Step back from the desk immediately," the guard commanded, his voice a low, booming baritone that left absolutely no room for argument. Thomas froze in terror. Diane let out a horrified shriek, dropping to her knees and reaching out toward her pinned son. "DeAndre. Oh my God, they are hurting him. Call the police. Stella, call the cops." I remained seated, watching the pathetic scene unfold with absolute detachment. "I am not calling anyone," I said smoothly. "You brought this on yourselves." It was then that I noticed movement just outside the glass wall of my office. Standing perfectly framed in the doorway was my niece Brittany. She was not screaming. She was not trying to help her brother. Instead, she had her smartphone held high, the ring light attachment glowing brightly. Tears streamed flawlessly down her heavily contoured cheeks. She was looking directly into the camera lens, her lip quivering with practiced vulnerability as she spoke to her followers. "Guys, please help us," Brittany sobbed softly to her massive live stream audience. "My aunt has completely lost her mind. She stole our family inheritance, and now she has armed goons attacking my innocent brother. Please share this everywhere. She cannot get away with this." The camera kept rolling as my security guards escorted the screaming trio out of the building. Brittany made sure to capture every second of her mother wailing and her brother being frog-marched to the elevator. Within an hour, that 2-minute clip had exploded across every major social media platform. Brittany had spent years cultivating an audience of 500,000 followers who hung onto her every word, believing her curated aesthetic of peace, love, and family values. Now she weaponized that parasocial army with terrifying efficiency. Sitting at my desk, I watched the view count on her original upload skyrocket past 3 million. She had titled the live broadcast to say my aunt stole our family future. But she did not stop at the initial video. Brittany immediately followed up with a tearful 30-minute sit-down vlog filmed from the passenger seat of her mother's car. The level of manipulation was genuinely impressive. She spun a narrative so twisted, so divorced from reality, that I almost did not recognize the villain she was describing. According to Brittany, the lottery ticket was a joint family purchase bought with the last few dollars her elderly grandparents had scraped together. She looked directly into the lens, her voice breaking perfectly on cue, and claimed that I had snatched the winning ticket right out of my mother's frail hands. She painted a picture of a greedy, abusive aunt who lived a life of corporate luxury while her family suffered in abject poverty. "My grandparents can barely afford their medication," Brittany sobbed to the camera, wiping away a single calculated tear. "My brother DeAndre is facing total financial ruin. The stress is literally killing him. He has panic attacks every night because of what she did to him. And instead of helping her own flesh and blood, my aunt hired mercenaries to assault him when he just wanted to talk. She is letting us starve so she can buy another vacation home. Please, guys, make her accountable." Her followers mobilized with terrifying speed. By mid-afternoon, my phone was practically vibrating off the desk with notifications. I had made the mistake of leaving my personal social media profiles public. My direct messages were flooded with thousands of vile messages. Complete strangers were sending me detailed death threats, promising to hunt me down and make me pay for what I did to my sweet niece. They called me a monster, a thief, and a sociopath. The digital mob did not stop at my personal accounts. They quickly identified my workplace from the background of Brittany's video. A coordinated attack began on the accounting firm's online presence. Within 2 hours, our corporate page received over 4,000 fake one-star reviews. People claimed I had embezzled their money, that the firm supported elder abuse, and that our services were a scam. The reception lines were jammed with angry callers demanding my immediate termination. The quiet, professional atmosphere of the firm had been completely shattered, replaced by the chaotic fallout of a viral witch hunt. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see the panicked expressions of my colleagues. Junior accountants were staring at their phones, whispering, and casting nervous glances in my direction. Sarah, my usually unflappable assistant, looked visibly stressed as she aggressively forwarded angry voicemails to a secure server. The situation was spiraling into a massive public relations nightmare, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The internal phone line buzzed loudly on my polished wooden desk. It was Marcus, the senior managing partner of the entire firm. His voice was incredibly tight, completely stripped of its usual professional warmth. "Stella, I need you in my office. Right now." I smoothed the skirt of my tailored suit, took a slow, centering breath, and walked down the long corridor. The silence in the hallway was deafening as every eye tracked my movement. When I entered the corner office, Marcus was pacing behind his massive oak desk. The firm's head of public relations was already sitting on the leather sofa, her laptop open, looking incredibly grim. "Stella, what on earth is happening?" Marcus demanded, gesturing frantically to the television screen mounted on his wall, which was currently muted but displaying a local news broadcast covering the viral internet drama. "Our servers are crashing. Clients are calling to pull their accounts. We are being painted as an accessory to elder abuse. This is a catastrophe. Are you really involved in a stolen lottery ticket scandal?" I walked over to the empty leather chair opposite his desk and sat down gracefully. I crossed my legs and looked directly at my panicked boss. The PR director braced herself for an emotional breakdown or a frantic defense. Instead, I simply smiled. Let them dig their grave. They dug their grave fast. Less than 48 hours after Brittany's video went viral, my family decided to monetize their newfound internet fame. They abandoned public opinion and marched straight into the legal system. Of course, they bypassed reputable firms. They hired Chad Bradley, a man whose aggressive face was plastered on dozens of brightly lit billboards. His slogan, "Chad gets you paid," told me everything about his legal philosophy. He was not a lawyer who cared about justice. He was a predator who smelled a massive payday and did not care about ethical lines. On Wednesday morning, a process server practically kicked down the glass doors of my firm to hand me a stack of legal documents. I was officially being sued in civil court by my parents, my sister Diane and DeAndre. The charges were ridiculous. They were suing me for civil theft, emotional distress, and something Chad creatively labeled a breach of oral contract. According to the fabricated 50-page document, we supposedly made a verbal family pact 3 decades ago that any lottery winnings would be split evenly among the bloodline. It was absolute fiction written with enough legal jargon to sound terrifying, but Chad was aiming for maximum psychological warfare. Along with the lawsuit, he filed an emergency injunction with a sympathetic judge claiming I was a severe flight risk who was actively attempting to move stolen funds out of the country. He demanded an immediate freeze on my personal bank accounts, property deeds, and financial assets until the trial concluded. He wanted to financially suffocate me, forcing a quick settlement. To maximize the pressure, Chad organized a press conference on the courthouse steps. I watched the local news broadcast from the quiet sanctuary of my office. Diane stood directly in front of a cluster of microphones clutching a crumpled tissue. She wore a faded cardigan I had not seen in 10 years, clearly trying to look as impoverished as possible. Chad stood right behind her, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder, his heavily gelled hair gleaming in the sunlight. "We trusted her," Diane sobbed to the gathered reporters, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed heartbreak. "She is my sister. We shared everything. When she stole that winning ticket, she did not just take our money, she took our parents' retirement. She took my son's future. We are facing eviction, and she is hiding behind her expensive corporate lawyers. We just want what is fair. We just want our family back." The reporters ate it up furiously, scribbling in their notepads. Chad stepped forward, adjusting his flashy silk tie, and boldly declared to the cameras that justice would be served and that his firm would not rest until every stolen penny was returned to this grieving family. It was a spectacular performance, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. They honestly thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought the account freeze would break me. 2 hours later, I sat in the sprawling glass-walled boardroom of Sterling and Vance, the most ruthless and expensive corporate law firm in the state. Across the polished mahogany table sat my lead attorney, Harrison Vance. He was a man who charged $2,000 an hour and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He had the injunction papers spread out in front of him. Harrison picked up the document detailing the emergency freeze on my bank accounts. He adjusted his silver-framed glasses, read the judge's signature, and then looked across the table at me. A slow, highly amused smile spread across his weathered face. Next to him, his junior partner let out a short, sharp bark of laughter. "They actually got the judge to sign the freeze order," Harrison said, tossing the papers back onto the table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Mr. Bradley thinks he has successfully locked up your entire net worth. He thinks you cannot buy a cup of coffee right now." I took a slow sip of sparkling water. "And what exactly did the court freeze, Harrison?" Harrison chuckled again, leaning back in his leather chair. "They froze your personal checking account, Stella. The one containing exactly $3,000. They also froze your savings account, which holds a massive balance of roughly $400. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "And the lottery winnings?" "Completely untouchable," Harrison replied smoothly. "As we arranged last month, the entire $75 million was deposited directly into an offshore irrevocable blind trust under a corporate shell name. You do not technically own those assets on paper, which means Chad Bradley and his circus act cannot touch a single dime. They are trying to freeze an ocean, Stella, but they do not even know what continent it is on. Would you like me to draft the next section of the script? Harrison's words settled over me like a warm blanket. The sheer absurdity of Chad Bradley's legal strategy was almost comical now that I knew my perimeter was absolutely secure. But defending myself was no longer enough. My family had escalated this from a private dispute to a public smear campaign and a frivolous lawsuit. They wanted to destroy my reputation, my career, and my peace of mind. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. If they wanted to weaponize the legal system and the internet against me, I was going to weaponize the one thing they desperately lacked: capital. I thanked Harrison, wrapped up the meeting, and immediately requested a private conference room. I pulled out my laptop and dialed the direct line to my wealth manager, David. He was the architect behind the offshore blind trust and the corporate LLCs that shielded my assets. When he answered, I wasted no time on pleasantries. David, I need you to run a comprehensive financial background check on my nephew DeAndre. I instructed, staring at the glittering city skyline through the large glass windows. I want to know exactly who holds the paper on his car dealership and his personal condo. Find out who is threatening him with foreclosure. It took David less than 4 hours to map out DeAndre's disastrous financial life. The boy was drowning. He had taken out massive expensive loans to fund a luxury lifestyle and a failing business, assuming the family's lottery win would bail him out. His primary creditor was a regional private equity firm called Apex Capital Holdings. DeAndre owed them just over $2.5 million, and because he had missed 3 consecutive payments, they were actively preparing to seize his collateral. I want that debt, I told David flatly. David paused on the other end of the line. You want to pay off his debt? No. I clarified, a cold smile touching my lips. I want to buy his debt. I want my primary LLC to purchase his entire loan portfolio from Apex Capital. I want to be his sole creditor. David understood immediately. Apex Capital will not just sell a distressed asset to a random LLC without an incentive, he warned. They are already moving toward foreclosure. Then offer them a premium. I replied without hesitation. Offer them 20% over the current face value of the loans. Make it an all-cash transaction closing within 24 hours. They will not turn down an immediate guaranteed profit to avoid the lengthy legal hassle of seizing and liquidating his dealership. My wealth manager went to work. The sheer power of liquid capital is terrifying when applied with precision. By noon the following day, Apex Capital had accepted the offer from my anonymous LLC. They were thrilled to offload a toxic asset at a premium. By Friday afternoon, the ink was dry on the transfer agreements. My family was busy giving tearful interviews to minor blog sites, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had just shifted permanently. I now owned every single financial obligation DeAndre had in this world. I owned the mortgage on his luxury downtown condo. I owned the commercial lease and the inventory loans for his failing luxury car dealership. I held the keys to his entire existence. I instructed David's legal team to draft the notification of transfer. We made sure it was written in the most aggressive, terrifying legalese possible, adhering strictly to the bounds of the law while maximizing the psychological impact. The document stated that his debt portfolio had been acquired by a new private holding company. It detailed his multiple breaches of contract, his delinquent payment history, and his overall financial insolvency. Then came the hammer drop. I sat in my home office sipping a glass of red wine as David forwarded me the confirmation that the email had been successfully delivered to DeAndre's inbox. I could picture my nephew sitting in his fake leather office chair at the dealership, his phone buzzing with the incoming message. He would open the legally binding email and read the bolded red text at the bottom. The new unnamed creditor was officially accelerating the loans due to his default status. The demand was absolute and completely strict. He had exactly 14 days to remit the entire balance of $2.5 million in full. If the funds were not wired by the deadline, the holding company would immediately seize his business, liquidate his inventory, and foreclose on his condo. He was effectively ruined, and the most beautiful part of the entire trap was that he had absolutely no idea the executioner holding the axe was his Aunt Stella. I knew this would finally break his arrogant spirit. I won today. My victory lap was quiet, private, and immensely satisfying. I spent the weekend finalizing my relocation plans, while my family undoubtedly spent it hyperventilating over DeAndre's mysterious new creditor. By Sunday afternoon, the reality of their situation must have finally pierced through their delusions. Chad Bradley had likely informed them that breaking a blind trust could take years of brutal litigation with absolutely no guarantee of a payout. They needed cash immediately, and the legal route was proving too slow. That was when the intercom in my luxury apartment buzzed loudly. It was my doorman heavily sighing into the microphone. "Ms. Stella, your sister is down in the lobby. She is not accompanied by anyone else, and she is aggressively insisting she just wants to drop something off. Should I have our security team escort her out?" I glanced at the stack of empty cardboard boxes waiting in my hallway. "Send her up," I replied calmly. I was genuinely curious to see what new strategy they had concocted. 2 minutes later, a soft knock echoed through my foyer. I opened the door to find Diane standing there, looking like a completely different person from the screaming banshee who had stormed my office. She was wearing a simple floral dress. In her hands she held a glass dish covered in aluminum foil. It was a homemade cherry pie, the exact recipe our grandmother used to bake for us. The sheer audacity of the psychological manipulation almost made me laugh out loud. "Stella," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with manufactured vulnerability. "I know you probably never want to see me again. But please, can I just come in for 5 minutes? I baked this for you. I just want to talk. No screaming, no lawyers, just us." I stepped aside, leaving the front door slightly ajar, and gestured toward the kitchen island. Diane walked in, slowly placing the pie on the marble counter as if it were a sacred offering. She refused to meet my eyes, staring at her hands as she began her performance. "I am so sorry, Stella." She started, a single tear spilling perfectly over her lower lash line. "Things have just been so incredibly stressful lately. DeAndre is losing his mind over his business. Mom and Dad are terrified about their retirement, and I just snapped. I should never have come to your office like that. I was just scared. You have to understand, we are drowning." I leaned against the cold wall, crossing my arms. "Go on." Diane took a deep, shaky breath. "This lawsuit, it is going to destroy our family completely. It will take years, and the lawyers will just eat up all the money anyway. We do not want to fight you, Stella. We are blood. We grew up in the same house. We shared a bedroom. You are my little sister, and I love you." She paused, letting the heavy emotional manipulation hang in the silent apartment before delivering the pitch. "We want to drop the lawsuit completely. We will walk away, issue a public apology to your firm, and fix the online mess. All we are asking for is a tiny compromise. Just give us $10 million. That is a fraction of what you won. You will still be incredibly wealthy, and we can save DeAndre. We can all just move on and heal." I stared at her. She was asking for $10 million while pretending she was doing me a favor by dropping a completely frivolous lawsuit. It was textbook gaslighting wrapped in a cherry pie crust. "Diane," I said, my voice eerily calm, "you do not seem to understand your position. I am not negotiating with you. You are not getting $10 million. You are not getting $10. You can take your fake apology, your store-bought pie, and your ridiculous lawsuit and leave." Her face hardened instantly, the sweet sister facade cracking to reveal the venom underneath. "You are making a huge mistake, Stella. You think you can just hide in this luxury apartment forever." "I cannot," I agreed smoothly. "Which is why I am not staying." Right on cue, The heavy service elevator doors chimed open. 4 men wearing matching moving company uniforms stepped out carrying stacks of flattened boxes and packing tape. They walked through my open door. "I am officially moving out today," I informed Diane. "Now get out!" Diane's face turned purple with pure, unadulterated rage. She realized she had lost her final leverage. As the lead mover politely asked her to step aside so he could bring a dolly through the doorway, she completely snapped. She shoved past him violently and screamed a vile, disgusting racial slur directly into his face before storming down the hallway. The echo of that slur hung in the air long after the apartment door clicked shut. The movers stood frozen, exchanging wide-eyed glances before returning to work with practiced professionalism. I tipped the lead mover an extra $500, completely unfazed by my sister's meltdown. That hateful outburst was the dying breath of their intimidation tactics. They had tried screaming, crying, and weaponizing public outrage. None of it worked. Now there was nowhere left for them to hide except the sterile, unforgiving arena of the legal system. 3 weeks later, the civil lawsuit officially entered the discovery phase. I sat across from Harrison Vance in the boardroom at Sterling and Vance. The mahogany table was covered in neat stacks of legal briefs and printed copies of Chad Bradley's filings. Harrison was reviewing a freshly printed email, his silver pen tapping rhythmically against his leather portfolio. "We have a slight development, Stella." Harrison began sliding the paper across the table toward me. "Chad Bradley reached out to my junior partner this morning. They are informally floating the idea of a settlement. They are asking for $5 million to drop the entire suit and issue a public retraction on all platforms." I glanced at the email, not bothering to pick it up. They went from $10 million in my kitchen to $5 million through official channels. They are bleeding cash. "They are desperate," Harrison corrected gently. "But pragmatically speaking, Stella, you should consider a counteroffer. A nuisance settlement of $2 million would make this disappear by Friday. I know it sounds unpalatable, but litigating this through depositions and trial will take up to 2 years. It will cost you a fortune in legal fees. Pay the toll, close the bridge, and move on." I leaned back in my chair, studying Harrison. He was an excellent attorney, focused purely on risk mitigation. But he did not understand the parasites I was dealing with. Paying them validates their extortion. It teaches them that harassing me is a highly viable business model. "No settlement," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "We are not paying them a dime. Not $5 million, not $2 million, not 50 cents. We are proceeding to depositions." Harrison sighed, removing his glasses and pinching the bridge of his nose. "Stella, I admire your principles, but taking them to a deposition gives Chad Bradley a stage. He will try to rattle you." "I am not worried about Chad Bradley," I replied. "I want them in that chair. I want my parents, Diane and DeAndre, sitting in a windowless room, staring into a camera lens, with a court reporter documenting every syllable. I want them under oath, swearing to tell the truth while they spin their ridiculous web of lies about a verbal family contract. You want them to commit perjury." Harrison realized, his eyes narrowing in sudden understanding. "I want them to hang themselves with their own rope," I confirmed. "They spent their lives lying to manipulate the narrative. They lied to our extended family. They lied to the internet, and now they will lie to the court. But lying on the internet does not put you in federal prison. A sworn deposition certainly does. They will not be able to stop themselves from exaggerating under oath." Harrison put his glasses back on. "And when they do perjure themselves, it is often difficult to prove intent without irrefutable documentary evidence contradicting their sworn testimony." I reached into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila folder, placing it squarely in the center of the table. I followed it with a small encrypted silver USB drive. I slid both items across the polished mahogany until they rested directly in front of my lawyer. Inside that folder, I said quietly, are the original mortgage application documents DeAndre submitted to Apex Capital 2 years ago. You will notice that the signatures of his supposed financial guarantors, my parents, are completely forged. He falsified their assets to secure his commercial loans, and they actively helped him cover it up. Harrison opened the folder, scanning the first page, as a sharp, predatory smile formed on his lips. "And the silver drive?" he asked, softly. "The drive contains exactly 40 hours of unedited, behind-the-scenes footage from Brittany's social media accounts," I explained. "I hired a private digital forensics firm to recover the deleted streams and raw outtakes. It features my sister and my mother explicitly discussing their plan to falsely accuse me of elder abuse to extort a settlement, complete with rehearsals of their fake crying. Let them lie on the record for hours, Harrison. Let them build a massive, inescapable fortress of perjury. And then I want you to drop these directly on the table." The day of the deposition arrived with a heavy, suffocating gray sky that perfectly matched the atmosphere inside the Sterling and Vance offices. We convened in Conference Room B, a sprawling, aggressively modern space dominated by a 20-foot glass table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The air conditioning was cranked low, keeping the room at a crisp, uncomfortable chill designed to keep opposing counsel on edge. Harrison sat to my right, immaculate, in a charcoal bespoke suit, organizing his pristine legal pads with surgical precision. The manila folder and the silver USB drive were safely locked inside his leather briefcase, waiting for the perfect moment to see the light of day. Exactly 5 minutes past the scheduled start time, the heavy glass doors swung open. My family walked in, moving as a unified, deeply entitled pack. Chad Bradley led the procession, his flashy grin practically reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights. Right behind him came my sister Diane and her husband Thomas, both projecting an air of supreme confidence. DeAndre swaggered in next, chewing gum, loudly, looking incredibly smug for a man who was exactly 12 days away from catastrophic financial ruin. Brittany trailed behind them, dressed in a muted beige sweater, looking purposefully demure, though I noticed her eyes instantly dart around the room searching for the best lighting. Finally, my mother and father entered, taking their seats directly across the massive glass table from me. They looked entirely unbothered, treating this federal legal proceeding like an annoying traffic stop they fully expected to talk their way out of. No one offered a greeting. The hostility rolling off their side of the table was palpable, but beneath it, I could see the raw, unchecked greed. They looked at me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a piñata they were about to crack open. Chad Bradley immediately began making a show of unpacking his voluminous, disorganized briefcase, stacking files loudly to assert dominance. Harrison simply watched him with the detached amusement of a biologist observing a particularly loud, unintelligent insect. At the head of the table, the court reporter, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, set up her stenotype machine. She tested the keys, the soft clacking sound echoing sharply in the tense silence of the room. A videographer adjusted a tripod in the corner, ensuring the camera lens was perfectly focused on the witness chair situated at the center of the table. Harrison leaned forward, resting his clasped hands on the glass surface. He looked directly at Chad Bradley. "We are ready to begin whenever your clients are, counselor." Chad smirked, adjusting his gaudy silk tie. "Oh, we are more than ready. We have been waiting for this day for a long time." The videographer announced the date, the time, and the case number for the record, his voice perfectly monotone. The red recording light on the camera blinked to life, a small glowing indicator that every word spoken from this moment forward was permanently etched into legal stone. Chad turned to my parents, giving them a reassuring, overly theatrical nod. My father was the first one selected to sit in the hot seat. He stood up from his spot next to my mother and walked over to the designated witness chair. He looked incredibly relaxed, almost bored, as he settled into the leather seat and adjusted his suit jacket. The court reporter asked him to raise his right hand. He did so without hesitation. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, under penalty of perjury?" She asked, her voice clear and authoritative. "I do." my father replied firmly, his voice echoing across the quiet room. Chad Bradley approached the table, opening a legal pad. "Let us start from the beginning," he said smoothly. "Can you describe the events surrounding the purchase of the lottery ticket in question?" My father leaned into the microphone. He did not even flinch. He did not look away. He looked directly across the glass table, his eyes locking onto mine, and he began to weave his fabricated reality. "I explicitly told Stella the ticket was a family investment," he stated on the record, his voice dripping with absolute conviction. "We had a verbal agreement, witnessed by everyone here, that we would split any winnings equally among the bloodline. She stole that ticket from our home." I sat perfectly still, my expression entirely unreadable. I did not gasp. I did not object. I did not offer any reaction whatsoever to his lies. I just stared unblinking at my father as he boldly and willingly committed a textbook act of felony perjury right in front of us today. My father's testimony concluded after an hour of aggressive fabricated storytelling. He stuck to his written script flawlessly, completely unaware of the trap closing around him. Next, Chad Bradley called my sister Diane to the chair. She was less composed than our father, opting for a highly emotional approach. She wept openly, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, recounting a completely fictitious narrative about how she had personally picked the lottery numbers based on her children's birthdays. Harrison let her speak, offering no objections, simply letting the court reporter document every single tearful lie. When Diane finally stepped down, looking exhausted but victorious, it was Brittany's turn. Brittany approached the witness chair with the practiced grace of an influencer walking a red carpet. She wore a soft pastel cardigan, presenting herself as the innocent, traumatized niece caught in the crossfire of her aunt's overwhelming greed. The red recording light on the camera seemed to act as a spotlight, and she leaned into it instinctively. Chad Bradley approached the table again, his voice dropping to a gentle, comforting register. "Brittany, sweetheart, can you tell us what happened on the night of the family dinner, the night the winning ticket was discovered?" Brittany took a deep, shaky breath, her lower lip quivering perfectly on cue. "It was awful," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We were all sitting around the table. Grandma had just checked the numbers. She was so happy, crying, because she thought all her financial worries were finally over. But then Aunt Stella just snapped." "What do you mean she snapped?" Chad prompted softly. "She slammed her hands on the table." Brittany cried, a single tear escaping and rolling down her cheek. She lunged across the dining room, aggressively snatched the ticket right out of Grandma's frail hands and shoved it into her purse. She was screaming that it belonged to her, that we were all leeches. She looked totally unhinged. We were terrified of her. The court reporter's fingers flew across the stenotype keys, immortalizing the dramatic fiction. Chad Bradley smiled very sympathetically, thanking Brittany for her bravery, and then returned to his seat. Now it was Harrison's turn to question her. He stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not look angry. He looked entirely calm. "Miss Brittany," Harrison began, his voice smooth and polite, "you have built quite a substantial following on social media, correct?" Brittany blinked, momentarily confused by the pivot, but her vanity quickly took over. "Yes, I have over 500,000 followers." "And you frequently document your daily life, including family gatherings, for your audience?" Harrison asked. "I do," she confirmed, sitting up a bit straighter. "My followers love my family content." Harrison paced slowly near the edge of the glass table. "On the night in question, the night you claim your aunt violently assaulted your grandmother and stole the ticket, were you filming?" Brittany hesitated for a fraction of a second. Chad Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I was holding my phone, yes," Brittany answered cautiously. "Did you record the altercation you just described under oath?" Harrison pressed his tone, hardening slightly. Brittany looked at her lawyer, then back to Harrison. She deployed another practiced tear. "I tried to. I hit record right as Aunt Stella started screaming, but my phone malfunctioned. The file corrupted completely. I was so upset because I wanted to show everyone what she did to us, but the video was just gone." Corrupted, Harrison repeated flatly. Yes, Brittany insisted, nodding firmly. It happens sometimes with large files. It was totally unrecoverable. Harrison stopped pacing. He walked back to his seat and picked up his leather briefcase. He opened the polished brass clasps with a sharp, echoing click. That is incredibly unfortunate, Miss Brittany, because digital corruption can be so frustrating. He reached into the briefcase, bypassing the manila folder, and retrieved a sleek black tablet. He tapped the screen a few times, waking the device. However, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with undeniable authority, my firm employs some of the best digital forensic investigators in the country. When your legal team filed this lawsuit, we immediately issued a subpoena directly to your cellular provider and the tech company that hosts your automatic cloud backups. The color instantly drained from Brittany's heavily contoured face. Chad Bradley shot up from his chair, his mouth opening to object, but Harrison was faster. Harrison turned the tablet around, sliding it smoothly across the glass table until it stopped directly in front of the stunned influencer. It turns out the video was not corrupted at all, Harrison stated, his eyes locking onto Brittany's terrified gaze. You simply deleted it, but the cloud remembers everything. Let us watch the raw, unedited video together, shall we? Harrison tapped the tablet screen. The high-definition video immediately filled the silence of the conference room. Because Brittany had been using premium recording equipment for her content creation, the audio was crystal clear. It did not show a violent altercation. It did not show an elderly woman weeping over her stolen future. It showed the exact opposite. The footage displayed our family sitting around the brightly lit dining room table finishing their dessert. The camera panned unsteadily, capturing my mother pouring another glass of wine, and my father laughing at something DeAndre had just said. Then the lens focused directly on my sister Diane. On the screen, Diane reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a small, brightly colored rectangle. It was the scratch-off lottery ticket. She did not hand it to our grandmother. She did not announce it as a family investment. Instead, she leaned across the table and tossed it carelessly onto my empty dessert plate. The crisp paper landed with a soft flutter. Diane smirked at the camera, her voice dripping with cruel condescension. Here, she sneered, the sound echoing loudly in the sterile legal boardroom. Keep it if you win, single lady. It is a joke gift. The recording continued to play, destroying every single sworn statement my family had just entered into the legal record. The video showed me looking down at the ticket, clearly humiliated by the implication that my single status was the punchline to their cruel joke. I calmly picked up the ticket and placed it into my leather purse without saying a word. No one protested. No one screamed. My grandmother did not even look up from her coffee cup. The only sound on the recording was the collective laughter of my family, thoroughly enjoying my public embarrassment. Brittany's own voice could be heard behind the camera, giggling as she zoomed in on my flushed face to capture my humiliation for her followers. Harrison tapped the screen again, freezing the video on a high-resolution frame of Diane's mocking smile. The silence that fell over the conference room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. The air conditioning continued its low hum, but no one dared to breathe. I watched my family's faces cycle through a fascinating spectrum of emotions. Brittany was staring at the tablet with wide, horrified eyes, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently. Diane had gone completely rigid, her skin turning an unhealthy shade of chalk white. My parents looked physically ill, their arrogant posture collapsing as the sheer magnitude of their legal exposure crashed down upon them. They had just committed felony perjury on the record, and we had just provided the irrefutable proof. But the most entertaining reaction belonged to their aggressively confident attorney. Chad Bradley looked as though he had just been physically struck by a freight train. The slick, arrogant facade he had worn since walking into the room completely melted away, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. He was a sleazy billboard lawyer, yes, but he was not stupid. He knew exactly what this footage meant. His massive payday had just evaporated into thin air. Worse, his clients had actively lied to him, pushing him to file a fraudulent lawsuit based entirely on fabricated evidence. By presenting their perjured testimony, he was now dangerously close to facing severe disciplinary action from the State Bar Association and potentially criminal charges of his own. Chad's heavy, ragged breathing was the only sound echoing in the completely silent room. He frantically wiped a large bead of cold sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting from the frozen image on the tablet to the court reporter whose fingers were hovering over her stenotype machine waiting for the next word. He suddenly slammed his yellow legal pad shut with a loud, desperate crack. "Stop the recording!" Chad stammered, his voice cracking noticeably. He waved his hands at the videographer. "Turn the camera off right now. We are taking an immediate recess. I need to confer with my clients outside this room immediately. This deposition is temporarily suspended." He quickly reached for his incredibly expensive leather briefcase, completely desperate to escape the absolute disaster he had just orchestrated. He wanted to drag his foolish clients into the hallway, scream at them, and figure out a clear way to withdraw the ridiculous lawsuit before the judge saw this footage. He foolishly thought he still had some control over the legal proceedings. He was entirely wonderfully mistaken. I slowly uncrossed my legs, placed both of my hands flat against the cool glass table, and looked directly at the highly panicked lawyer. I spoke for the first time since entering the building, my voice cold and carrying absolute authority. "We are not taking a recess," I said evenly. "I am not done." Chad Bradley froze. He looked from me to Harrison, his flight response warring with his professional obligation. Slowly, he sank back into his leather seat. He knew that walking out now after the presentation of explicit evidence of perjury would be career suicide. Diane was shaking her head in silent denial while my parents stared blankly at the dark tablet screen. Harrison did not give them a moment to recover. He reached back into his open briefcase and retrieved the thick manila folder he had pointed out earlier. He opened it deliberately, pulling out a thick stack of printed financial records, loan applications, and bank statements. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the heavy stack sliding smoothly across the long glass table. The papers came to a stop directly in front of my sister Diane and her husband Thomas. Thomas stared down at the documents, his brow furrowing in confusion. Then his eyes locked onto the bold black logo of Apex Capital printed at the top of the first page. The remaining color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool glass. My voice was steady, methodical, and completely devoid of mercy. "You see, when my wealth manager purchased DeAndre's failing debt portfolio last week, we gained access to his entire financial history. We audited every single application, every asset declaration, and every line of credit he ever opened. That is when we discovered the anomalies." I gestured to the papers resting in front of Thomas. "Go ahead and turn to the fourth page, Thomas. The guarantor signature page for the secondary commercial loan." Thomas did not move. His hands were trembling so violently he could not even grasp the edge of the paper. Chad Bradley reached over and flipped the page for him. The sleazy lawyer scanned the document, his eyes widening in fresh horror as he realized the depth of the criminality sitting next to him. "You needed cash fast." I continued, my gaze fixed intensely on my sister. "DeAndre was drowning, but you also had other pressing financial priorities. You needed to maintain the illusion of wealth. Specifically, Brittany had her heart set on a highly publicized, luxury month-long European cruise to generate content for her channel. You did not have the liquid capital to fund it, so you got creative." I watched Diane swallow hard, her throat bobbing nervously. "You used DeAndre's dealership as a front to apply for a secondary line of credit," I explained meticulously, ensuring the court reporter captured every single damning detail. "But his credit was already destroyed. The bank required a wealthy guarantor. So you provided one. You submitted my personal financial records, which you stole from my home office during the Thanksgiving dinner last year. You falsified a guarantor agreement. You forged my signature, explicitly tying my personal assets to your fraudulent loan. That is a lie." Diane choked out, her voice barely a squeak. "You cannot prove any of that. We never touched your office." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Diane, You really need to understand the concept of digital forensic tracking. The digital application was submitted from the IP address registered directly to your home router. The email address used to confirm the fraudulent guarantor status was a burner account created on Thomas's personal laptop. Furthermore, we hired an independent forensic handwriting expert who conclusively proved the physical signature on the hard copy was traced by your hand. Brittany let out a loud dramatic gasp, looking at her parents in genuine shock. Her carefully curated influencer persona was crumbling under the weight of federal crimes. Once the bank approved the fraudulent loan based on my stolen credentials, I said, bringing the trap to its flawless conclusion, the funds were dispersed. We tracked the wire transfers. Exactly $30,000 was immediately moved from DeAndre's commercial account into your personal checking account. 2 days later, a cashier's check for $30,000 was written directly to Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. You committed federal bank fraud and identity theft so your daughter could take pictures on a boat. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft, frantic clicking of the court reporter's machine. Thomas was breathing heavily, a fine sheen of sweat coating his forehead. Chad Bradley finally found his voice. He closed the folder sharply. "Ms. Stella," he began, his tone now respectful and subservient. "I believe my clients would be amenable to dropping this lawsuit immediately." I sat back in my chair, adjusting my silk cuffs. I looked directly at Thomas. "I forwarded all of these documents to the FBI and the IRS 48 hours ago," I said cleanly. Thomas clutched his chest in panic. His breath came in short, ragged wheezes as he slumped heavily against the sleek leather chair. The sheer magnitude of his massive federal exposure was literally suffocating him in real time. Beside him, Diane was left practically catatonic, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for a hidden exit that did not exist. Chad Bradley, their highly paid, incredibly sleazy billboard lawyer, had completely physically distanced himself from them. He slowly pushed his chair back several feet, creating a distinct visual barrier between himself and his now radioactive clients. He was already mentally drafting his withdrawal from the case to save his own precious legal license. The silence in the conference room was incredibly heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, indifferent clicking of the court reporter documenting the destruction of my family. Then the instinct for pure self-preservation finally kicked in. DeAndre, who had been sitting uncharacteristically quiet since the video played, suddenly vaulted out of his chair. The arrogant swagger he had paraded into the room was entirely gone, replaced by the frantic, panicked energy of a cornered rat. He looked at his father clutching his chest, looked at his mother staring blankly, and made the immediate, ruthless decision to throw them directly to the wolves. "I had nothing to do with any of this," DeAndre shouted, his voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. He threw his hands up in a gesture of complete surrender, backing away from his parents. "Aunt Stella, you have to believe me. I never saw those mortgage documents. I did not forge your signature. My parents handled all the secondary financing for the dealership. They told me they secured an angel investor. I swear to God, I had no idea they were committing bank fraud." Diane snapped out of her stupor, whipping her head around to stare at her son in absolute horror. "DeAndre," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the betrayal. "How could you say that? We did this for you. I do not care," DeAndre screamed back, his face flushing dark red. "I am not going to federal prison for your mistakes, Aunt Stella, please." He turned back to me, his eyes wide and pleading, practically begging for mercy. "I want my family to survive. I have a business to run. I am already drowning in debt. I cannot afford to be dragged down by their criminal charges. You have to tell the FBI I was completely ignorant of the fraud. I am the victim here, too. I watched my nephew perform his pathetic display of disloyalty. He was entirely willing to watch his own parents go to prison if it meant saving his failing luxury car dealership. It was the ultimate validation of everything I knew about him. He was not just arrogant. He was fundamentally hollow. I let him ramble for another 30 seconds, letting his desperate pleas fill the sterile air of the conference room before I finally raised a single hand to silence him. "You are not a victim, DeAndre," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a surgical blade. "You are a terrible businessman who funded a fake billionaire lifestyle with borrowed money. And speaking of your debt, we have one final piece of business to conclude today." I turned to Harrison, who smoothly retrieved a second manila folder from his leather briefcase. This one was significantly thicker than the first. I slid it across the long glass table. It stopped precisely at the edge, right where DeAndre had been sitting. DeAndre stared at the folder as if it were a live explosive. His hands shook as he reached out and flipped open the heavy cover. The first page displayed the official transfer of his massive debt portfolio from Apex Capital Holdings to a private unnamed LLC. The second page detailed the immediate acceleration of his loan terms due to his multiple defaults. "You received an email about your debt transfer last week," I noted calmly. "You have been running around in a panic trying to figure out the identity of the private holding company that bought your entire financial existence." DeAndre looked up from the documents, his face completely devoid of color. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he finally managed to speak. "It was you. I am your new creditor, DeAndre," I stated with absolute terrifying clarity. "You owe me $450,000 due in exactly 48 hours. That number was the balloon payment required to stop the foreclosure. If he failed to produce the cash, I owned his entire life. The weight of his reality crushed him." DeAndre let out a weak gasp. His legs simply gave out beneath him. DeAndre collapses back into his chair, completely hyperventilating. Brittany screams at him, realizing they are utterly broke. Brittany's screams tore through the sterile conference room, a piercing sound of absolute panic. She slapped her brother's shoulder repeatedly, demanding to know how he could have been so stupid to lose everything. DeAndre just sat there gasping heavily for air, clutching his chest as if his heart was giving out. My parents were frozen, overwhelmed by the catastrophic revelations. The grand illusion of our family's superiority was shattered, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of their impending ruin. I let them spiral for exactly 1 minute. Watching people who had spent decades projecting an image of flawless wealth and moral high ground instantly devolve into terrified cornered animals was fascinating. Finally, I tapped my manicured fingernail against the heavy glass table. The sharp rhythmic clicking cut through the chaotic shouting. "Quiet," I commanded. The word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of an executioner's gavel. Surprisingly, they obeyed. Brittany swallowed her sobs, wiping her ruined mascara. DeAndre buried his face in his trembling hands. My mother looked at me with a mixture of terror and disbelief, finally realizing that the obedient daughter she had bullied for 30 years was holding a loaded gun to their future. "You have all spent the last month trying to destroy my life." I began, my voice even and entirely devoid of sympathy. "You orchestrated a massive online smear campaign, perjured yourselves on the federal record, and committed bank fraud. By all legal and moral metrics, I should let the authorities drag every single one of you out of this building in handcuffs." However, I continued, leaning back in my leather chair. "A lengthy federal trial sounds exhausting, and I have a company to run. Therefore, I am offering you exactly one opportunity to walk out of this room. It is not a negotiation. It is a dictate of total surrender. You will agree to my terms right now, or Harrison presses send on the encrypted file transfer to the federal prosecutor's office, and I instruct my holding company to initiate the immediate seizure of DeAndre's commercial and personal properties." Chad Bradley leaned forward, desperate to salvage his own skin. "What are the terms, Ms. Stella?" "My clients will agree to whatever you propose." I did not even look at the lawyer. I kept my eyes locked on my sister Diane. "First, this ridiculous lawsuit is dropped with prejudice. You will sign the formal dismissal papers before you leave this table, legally binding yourselves to never pursue this fabricated claim again." Second, I shifted my cold gaze to my sobbing niece. "Brittany, your career as a wholesome family influencer is officially over. You used your platform to weaponize a mob against me. You are going to use that exact same platform to dismantle it." By 5 o'clock this evening, you will post a new video to your Instagram and YouTube channels. It will be unedited. There will be no fake crying and no manipulative background music. You will look directly into the camera and admit that you completely fabricated the entire story. You will confess that the ticket was a cruel joke gift given by your mother, that I stole absolutely nothing, and that you orchestrated the harassment campaign out of pure greed. You will leave that video pinned permanently. If you miss the 5 o'clock deadline, or if you deviate even slightly from the script, the deal is off. The unedited footage goes to the judge, the forged documents go to the FBI, and DeAndre will be locked out of his condo and dealership by Friday. I will personally ensure your entire family is bankrupted and incarcerated. Do we have a crystal clear understanding? The ultimatum hung in the freezing air of the conference room. For a split second, there was total silence. Then the powder keg finally exploded. The family did not unite against me. They turned entirely on each other, transforming into wild animals, desperate to escape the trap. Diane started screaming at Thomas, blaming him for keeping the forged documents on his computer. Thomas screamed back, calling her a greedy monster who pushed him into the fraud. DeAndre lunged across the table toward Brittany, demanding she make the video immediately to save his business, while Brittany shrieked that admitting the truth would ruin her brand forever. My mother began wailing loudly, blaming my father for not stopping Diane's cruel joke at the dinner table. They were tearing each other to pieces, exposing decades of toxic resentment. I did not intervene. I did not offer any comfort or attempt to mediate their vicious infighting. I simply reached out, picked up my crystal glass of sparkling water, and took a slow, refreshing sip. I sat back in the expensive leather chair, completely at peace, watching the empire of lies burn. The following afternoon brought a profound sense of quiet satisfaction. I did not go into the office. Instead, I spent the morning finalizing my travel arrangements and tying up the loose ends of my previous life. As the clock approached 5, I opened my laptop and navigated to Brittany's social media profiles. The tension across her platforms was palpable. Her followers had been eagerly awaiting an update on the lawsuit against her supposedly evil aunt. At exactly 4:59, the notification popped up. A new video had been posted across all her channels simultaneously. There was no clickbait title, no heavily filtered thumbnail, and absolutely no sponsored product placements. I clicked play. The image that filled my screen was unrecognizable from the polished influencer who had sat in the deposition room the day before. Brittany was sitting on the floor of her beige bedroom, staring into the camera lens. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back into a messy, unstyled knot. Her face was blotchy and red, her eyes swollen from hours of genuine terrified crying. The pristine ring light was turned off, casting her in harsh, unflattering natural shadows. She looked completely destroyed, stripped of the artificial glamour she used to shield herself from reality. For a long moment she just stared at the lens, her chest heaving with deep, ragged breaths. Then she spoke. Her voice was raspy and devoid of its usual peppy cadence. "I lied to you," Brittany whispered, staring at the floor before forcing herself to look back at the camera. "I lied to all of you. Every single thing I told you about my Aunt Stella was a complete fabrication. She did not steal my grandmother's lottery ticket. She did not assault anyone. She did not leave us to starve." She paused to wipe her nose with the back of her trembling hand. "The ticket was a cruel joke. My mother gave it to her at a family dinner to humiliate her because she was single. When we found out it was a winning ticket, we lost our minds. We wanted the money. We were greedy and selfish. I made up the story about elder abuse because I wanted to weaponize this audience against her to force a financial settlement. My family committed fraud to fund my lifestyle and we got caught. I am a liar, and I am so deeply sorry." The video ended abruptly after exactly 2 minutes. There was no plea for forgiveness, no call to action, just the raw, ugly truth hanging in the digital space. The reaction was instantaneous and absolutely brutal. The internet is a fickle creature, and the only thing it loves more than building someone up is tearing them down. Within minutes, the comment section exploded into a toxic wasteland of betrayal and fury. The very same people who had sent me death threats 24 hours earlier immediately redirected their righteous anger toward the influencer who had manipulated their empathy. They dragged her mercilessly. They called her a scam artist, a sociopath, and a criminal. The viral momentum shifted from a witch hunt against me to the complete digital annihilation of Britney's career. By 6 o'clock, the corporate fallout began. First, a major cosmetics brand released a public statement severing all ties with her immediately. 10 minutes later, a fitness apparel company followed suit, publicly condemning her actions and pulling her discount codes. By 8 o'clock, the boutique talent agency that represented her posted a sterile tweet announcing the immediate termination of her contract due to severe breaches of their morality clause. Her carefully curated empire evaporated in less than 3 hours. Meanwhile, her brother was facing his own rapid destruction. Knowing he could never produce the $450,000 balloon payment, I demanded DeAndre made the only desperate move he had left. He formally filed for emergency bankruptcy protection the following morning. The legal filing instantly became public record, completely destroying his fraudulent persona as a wealthy investment guru and successful luxury car broker. His remaining clients fled, his vendors cut him off, and the bank locked the doors to his empty dealership. He was utterly ruined, stripped of everything he valued. I observed all of this unfolding from 3,000 miles away. I stood perfectly still beside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of a breathtaking $15 million penthouse located in the heart of Manhattan. The real estate agent was enthusiastically detailing the custom marble countertops and the private rooftop terrace, but my attention was firmly fixed on my phone screen. I slowly sipped my cold champagne and smiled softly, watching the live follower count on Britney's page drop by the thousands every single second, while the beautiful New York skyline stretched out endlessly before me. The breathtaking view of the New York skyline was merely the opening act of my new life. Over the next 3 weeks, I settled into the penthouse, trading the toxic drama of my past for the quiet, absolute power of immense wealth. But while I was selecting custom Italian furniture and reviewing investment portfolios, the meticulously crafted trap I had set back in that sterile conference room was finally snapping shut on my sister and her husband. I had warned Thomas and Diane that I forwarded their forged loan applications to the federal authorities. They likely assumed it was a bluff or that the bureaucratic gears of the justice system would grind slowly enough to give them time to hide their remaining assets. They severely underestimated the efficiency of the IRS and the FBI when handed a perfectly packaged, irrefutable case of felony bank fraud and identity theft. The authorities did not send a polite letter asking for clarification. They moved with swift, devastating precision. On a Tuesday morning, Thomas went to buy his usual overpriced espresso and found his platinum credit card declined. When he called his private banker demanding to know why he was being embarrassed in public, he received the terrifying news. A federal judge had signed a sweeping order freezing every single financial account tied to his name, Diane's name, and their LLCs. Their checking accounts, their retirement funds, their investment portfolios, everything was locked down, pending a massive federal investigation. In the blink of an eye, they went from living a fake country club lifestyle to having absolutely zero liquid capital. They could not even buy groceries, let alone pay their exorbitant legal fees. But the frozen accounts were just the first domino to fall. Because all their money was inaccessible, they immediately defaulted on the fraudulent secondary mortgage they had taken out to fund Britney's cruise and DeAndre's failing business. The bank, already alerted to the fraudulent nature of the loan by my legal team, showed absolutely no mercy. They triggered the acceleration clause, the collateral Thomas and Diane had foolishly used to secure that massive line of credit was not just any property. It was the sprawling 4-bedroom colonial home my grandfather had built from scratch. It was the crown jewel of our family, the house where we had celebrated every holiday, the physical representation of the legacy they claimed to protect. Now it was just a distressed asset on a bank ledger. The formal foreclosure notice was nailed to their custom mahogany front door by a county sheriff declaring their imminent eviction. That was when my phone started ringing. Diane bypassed my block number by using cheap prepaid burner phones. She left voicemail after voicemail, each one more hysterical than the last. I sat on my velvet sofa looking out over Central Park, listening to the destruction of her pride. "Stella, please pick up," Diane sobbed in the first message, her voice thick with panic. "The bank is taking the house. Grandpa's house, Stella. You cannot let them do this to us. Thomas is having chest pains again. The feds took our accounts. We have nothing." 2 hours later, another message arrived. Her tone had shifted from begging to pure, unadulterated terror. "Stella, I am begging you on my hands and knees, call the bank. Tell them you will guarantee the loan. Tell the FBI you made a mistake. If they take the house, we have nowhere to go. We are going to be homeless at our age. You cannot put your own sister out on the street. Please, Stella, have some mercy." I listened to her desperate pleas, analyzing my own emotional response. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no guilt, no lingering sense of familial duty, and certainly no mercy. Diane was experiencing the exact terrifying reality she had happily tried to force upon me when she thought she could steal my future. She had played a ruthless game and lost everything. I deleted the voicemails with a single clinical swipe of my finger. I did not call her back. I did not text her. Instead, I opened my encrypted email server and dialed the direct line to David, my wealth manager. David answered on the second ring. "Good afternoon, Stella. How is the new penthouse?" "The penthouse is perfect, David," I replied smoothly. "But we have a new real estate acquisition to handle today. My sister's primary residence is officially entering the bank's foreclosure auction. I am sending you the property details right now. I want you to instruct our primary holding, LLC, to contact the bank's asset management division immediately. I want to buy the property. Offer them the full outstanding balance of the defaulted loan. Pay for it entirely in cash. Close the deal by Friday." David executed the instructions with the ruthless efficiency I paid him for. By Thursday afternoon, the bank had enthusiastically accepted the all-cash offer from my private holding company. They were thrilled to wipe a toxic defaulted asset off their balance sheets without enduring the lengthy, expensive public auction process. The wire transfer cleared my offshore accounts seamlessly, completely bypassing the federal freeze that had paralyzed my family. By Friday morning, the digital ink was dry on the deed transfer. I was officially the sole uncontested legal owner of the sprawling colonial house where I had spent my entire childhood being treated like a second-class citizen. My parents no longer owned the physical foundation of their arrogant legacy. They were now merely my unauthorized tenants. I did not call them to gloat. I let the legal system speak for me. I instructed Harrison to draft a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. We ensured the document was airtight, citing their lack of a valid lease agreement and their status as holdover occupants following the foreclosure sale. It was a standard eviction notice, but the delivery method was going to be anything but standard. I knew my father. Thomas would try to physically intimidate a regular delivery driver, or simply tear up a certified letter and pretend it never arrived. He had spent his entire life believing the rules did not apply to him. I needed to shatter that delusion publicly and permanently. Harrison hired the most aggressive, relentless process-serving agency in the state. Because of the highly volatile nature of the situation and the massive federal fraud investigation hanging over my parents, the agency coordinated directly with the local police precinct. They requested a civil standby, ensuring 2 uniformed officers would accompany the server to prevent any breach of the peace. It was a perfectly legal precaution that also guaranteed maximum visibility. On Tuesday morning at exactly 10 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb of my childhood home. Right behind it was a marked police cruiser, its lights flashing silently, reflecting off the manicured green lawns of the exclusive suburban neighborhood. This was the exact time my mother usually hosted her weekly garden club brunch. I knew half a dozen of the neighborhood's most prominent gossips would be sitting on her back patio sipping mimosas and admiring her prize-winning hydrangeas. A towering man in a sharp suit stepped out of the sedan, clutching a thick manila envelope. Two uniformed police officers stepped out of the cruiser, walking closely behind him, up the long, perfectly paved driveway. The sudden arrival of law enforcement shattered the quiet perfection of the street. Curtains twitched in adjacent windows. Neighbors out walking their purebred dogs stopped dead in their tracks, staring openly at the unfolding scene. The process server pressed the glowing doorbell. A moment later, my father opened the heavy mahogany door. Thomas was wearing his expensive golf attire, clearly planning to hit the country club despite his frozen bank accounts. The smug expression on his face instantly vanished the moment he registered the two police officers standing on his pristine porch. "Are you Thomas Vance, the process server?" asked loudly, ensuring his voice carried across the perfectly manicured lawn. My father puffed out his chest, attempting to project authority. "Yes, I am. What is the meaning of this? Why are the police at my house?" The process server did not flinch. "You have been legally served," he announced, thrusting the thick envelope directly into my father's chest. "This is a formal 30-day notice of eviction from the new legal owner of this property. You and all other occupants are ordered to vacate the premises entirely within 30 days, or physical removal proceedings will commence immediately." Thomas stumbled backward, his hands instinctively coming up to push the envelope away. "I am not taking that," he shouted, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson. "This is my house. You cannot evict me from my own property. I refuse to accept these papers." The papers dropped to the welcome mat. The process server simply took a step back, pulling out a small camera and taking a quick time-stamped photograph of the envelope resting at my father's feet. "Physical acceptance is not required for legal service to be valid, sir," the server replied cleanly. "You have been notified." My mother, drawn by the shouting, appeared in the doorway. She was clutching a white linen napkin, her face perfectly pale. Behind her, the frightened members of her elite garden club were peering out from the long hallway, witnessing the complete destruction of her flawless social standing. The entire neighborhood watched in absolute horrified shock as the supposedly perfect parents were legally ordered to vacate the family premises. 30 days passed, with the agonizing slowness of a ticking time bomb for my family. The neighborhood gossip never died down. In fact, it only amplified as the deadline approached. By the 30th morning, the pristine driveway of my childhood home was occupied not by luxury SUVs, but by a battered rented moving truck. Thomas and Diane had been stripped of their hired help. The federal freeze had drained every available cent, forcing them to pack their entire lives into cheap cardboard boxes with their own two hands. The summer humidity was brutal. From the tinted window of my chauffeur-driven Mercedes Maybach, I watched my father struggle to lift a heavy box of kitchenware up the aluminum ramp of the truck. His designer golf shirt was stained with dark patches of sweat. He looked 10 years older, his arrogant posture completely broken by the weight of his own hubris. Beside him, Diane was dragging a taped-up garbage bag filled with clothes, her hair frizzy and her face devoid of the expensive cosmetics she used to flaunt. They looked utterly pathetic. I instructed my personal driver to carefully pull the sleek black Mercedes directly into the center of the driveway, deliberately blocking the only exit path of their rented moving truck. The heavy, expensive tires crunched loudly against the pristine concrete, commanding immediate attention from everyone present. The sound made Thomas drop the box he was holding. It hit the ramp with a loud crash, sending shattered porcelain spilling onto the ground. Diane instantly froze, her tired eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated panic as my driver stepped out, walked slowly around the front of the luxury vehicle, and respectfully opened my passenger door. I finally stepped out into the thick, humid morning air, wearing a perfectly tailored white linen designer suit that contrasted incredibly sharply with their utterly filthy, sweat-soaked moving clothes. I certainly had not come here today to help them pack. I had simply come to conduct a formal, thorough inspection of my new real estate asset. I slowly walked up the driveway, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. Several neighbors were already standing on their front lawns pretending to water their flower beds, while aggressively staring at the spectacle unfolding at our property line. Thomas refused to look at me. He turned his back, staring down at the broken plates scattered across the ramp, completely paralyzed by the absolute humiliation of his public downfall. But Diane reacted differently. The sight of me standing there in pristine condition, while her entire universe collapsed into a rented box truck, finally broke the last remaining thread of her sanity. She dropped the black garbage bag. It hit the concrete with a dull thud. She let out a guttural, agonizing sob and ran toward me. Before my driver could even step forward to intercept her, Diane collapsed right at my feet. She fell hard onto her knees, scraping them against the rough driveway, and reached out to grasp the hem of my pristine trousers. "Stella, please," she wailed, her voice echoing down the quiet suburban street for everyone to hear. "Please, I am begging you. Do not do this to us. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank took the cars. The feds took the accounts. DeAndre will not even answer our phone calls. We are going to be living in a motel by tonight. Please let us stay in the guest house. We will pay rent when the accounts unfreeze. We will do anything you want. Just do not throw us out onto the street like garbage." I looked down at her, keeping my face completely expressionless. "Diane, you are trespassing on my property," I stated cleanly. "Release my clothing immediately, or I will have my driver physically remove you." She let go, but she did not get up. She stayed on her knees, her tears leaving dark, wet streaks through the dirt on her face. "You cannot be this cold," she sobbed, clasping her hands together as if praying to a terrifying new deity. "We are blood, Stella. We are your family. I know I made mistakes. I know I was cruel. But it was just temporary insanity," she shrieked desperately, trying to rewrite history one last time. "The stress of the business, the pressure to keep up appearances, it made me crazy. I was not thinking straight. But beneath it all, we are blood. You have to remember that. You have to forgive your own flesh and blood." I stared down at the woman who had spent 30 years trying to make me feel completely worthless. My voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a steel vault slamming shut. "You showed me exactly what my blood is worth to you. $1. The heavy engine of the rented moving truck roared to life, a rough and struggling sound perfectly mirroring the broken people trapped inside the cab. I watched without a single ounce of pity as Thomas finally put the heavy vehicle into drive. The truck slowly rolled down the pristine suburban street, carrying the pathetic remnants of their fake empire away forever. Diane did not even look back, her desperate sobs muffled by the closed windows. The neighborhood spectators lingered briefly before retreating into their flawless homes to gossip. The street grew entirely quiet, leaving me alone in the humid morning air. I turned around to face the sprawling colonial house. For the first time, it did not represent oppression or pain. It simply belonged to me. I used my newly minted silver key to unlock the heavy mahogany front door. The interior was completely empty, stripped of the massive, pretentious portraits my parents used to intimidate their guests. But the house still felt infected by their lingering presence. Over the years, they had systematically erased every trace of my grandfather. They covered his beautiful handcrafted oak floors with cheap laminate because Diane saw it in a lifestyle magazine. They painted over the warm brick fireplace with a sterile, gaudy white. They replaced reliable antique fixtures with imitation gold chandeliers that looked incredibly tacky. Walking through the echoing vacant rooms, I realized they had treated this magnificent house exactly how they treated me. They buried the authentic foundation under layers of cheap vanity. I refused to let my grandfather's legacy remain suffocated. The very next morning, I hired a premium architectural restoration firm with a massive budget and a single directive. I wanted every modification my parents made demolished entirely. It was an absolute purge of their toxic presence. 2 days later, it was incredibly therapeutic to stand on the front lawn and listen to sledgehammers smashing the gaudy laminate and tacky chandeliers into pieces. Over 3 dedicated months, the team worked meticulously. They stripped the white paint, treating the masonry until the brick glowed with familiar warmth. They pulled up the cheap flooring and painstakingly refinished the original thick oak planks hidden underneath. They restored the house exactly to how my grandfather had loved it, deeply honoring his genuine spirit and hard work. But a house is meant to be utilized, not preserved as a quiet museum. My grandfather built his wealth by empowering people, a crucial lesson my greedy parents completely ignored. I decided to use the property to ensure no other young woman would endure the manipulation I survived. I established the Theodore Vance Foundation, dedicating the beautifully restored house as its headquarters. We provided massive debt-free grants, elite legal resources, and business mentorship exclusively to underprivileged female students. We also offered full scholarships to highly competitive trade schools, ensuring they had multiple avenues for success. We taught them to build their own credit-secure assets and establish total financial independence so they would never rely on a toxic family. The living room where my sister once mocked me was brilliantly transformed into a collaborative workspace for young women building their own empires. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon, I sat in my grandfather's old study, now my private office. I was reviewing a brilliant grant proposal from a young woman developing an innovative tech startup. The restored oak desk felt solid and grounding beneath my hands. The house hummed with the quiet, joyful productivity of the foundation staff working outside my door. I could hear the faint sound of laughter and collaboration echoing from the hallway. It was a perfect, peaceful environment. Then my cell phone buzzed gently against the polished wood. I glanced at the glowing screen. The incoming text message was from an unsaved number, but the desperate, frantic tone was instantly recognizable. Aunt Stella. Please, the text read. It is Brittany. I know you hate me, but I have nowhere to turn. I lost my agency contract and my sponsors. I am working the register at a discount retail store in a dirty strip mall, and I cannot afford rent for my studio apartment. My parents are living in a cheap motel, and DeAndre will not speak to us. I am begging for a loan. Just $5,000 so I do not get evicted today. I will pay you back, I swear. Please do not ignore this. I read the pathetic message twice, absorbing her complete downfall. She traded fake internet fame for a minimum wage reality, finally learning the true value of $1. I did not type a reply. I did not feel a single drop of guilt or lingering obligation. I simply pressed the block button, erasing her number from my life forever, and went back to funding the future. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the hushed, luxurious lounge of the private aviation terminal at JFK International Airport. The chaotic events of the previous year felt like a distant movie. The screaming matches, the social media smear campaigns, the perjury trap, and the eviction had faded into the rearview mirror. I watched the sleek jets taxiing on the tarmac outside the panoramic windows. Society conditions us to believe family is everything, an unbreakable bond demanding infinite sacrifice. For 30 years I swallowed that lie. I let my parents, Diane and her children, use me as an emotional punching bag and financial safety net. They convinced me I was the defective one. But the $75 million lottery ticket did not ruin my family. It simply illuminated them. It was the scalpel I needed to finally excise the malignant tumor they had become in my life. I did not just win a massive, unprecedented financial jackpot that night at the dinner table. I won my absolute, unconditional freedom. Ms. Vance, your aircraft is ready for departure, a smartly dressed terminal attendant announced softly, breaking my quiet reverie and offering a warm, genuine smile. I picked up my designer leather weekender bag, which was the only luggage I needed for the next 30 days. I was heading to the Swiss Alps for a month-long, totally off-the-grid luxury ski trip. There would be no corporate board meetings, no foundation grant reviews, no aggressive lawyers, and absolutely no family drama. Just breathtaking snow-capped mountains, roaring stone fireplaces, and pure, unadulterated peace. I walked across the private tarmac, the crisp evening air biting pleasantly at my cheeks, and climbed the illuminated steps of the waiting Gulfstream G650. The aircraft interior was a masterpiece of modern luxury, featuring plush cream leather seats, warm walnut wood paneling, and soft ambient cabin lighting. The private flight attendant welcomed me aboard, gently took my heavy winter coat, and directed me to the oversized captain chair, located near the large oval window. I settled into the incredibly soft leather buckling my seatbelt as I felt the powerful jet engines spool up beneath me. The aircraft smoothly pushed back from the staging area, beginning its slow taxi toward the designated runway. New York City sparkled brilliantly in the distance, a glittering grid of golden lights representing the vast empire I had successfully secured for myself and the young women studying at my foundation. As the jet rapidly accelerated down the dark runway and lifted effortlessly into the night sky, I reached into the front pocket of my tailored silk trousers. My fingers brushed against a small, stiff piece of paper. I pulled it out and held it up to the soft, warm reading light. It was a cheap, brightly colored $1 scratch-off lottery ticket. I had impulsively purchased it at a small newsstand on my way to the airport earlier that afternoon. The metallic silver ink covering the play area gleamed under the cabin lights, promising the tiny fleeting thrill of a potential jackpot. I stared at the little piece of cardboard resting in my palm. 6 months ago, a very similar ticket had ignited a massive war that burned my entire past completely to the ground. It had forced me to brutally confront the ugly, undeniable truth about the very people who loudly claimed to love me, pushing me to build an impenetrable fortress of legal and financial boundaries they could never cross again. I looked at the shiny silver coating, wondering for a fleeting curious second if there was another grand prize hiding underneath. Then a soft, incredibly genuine smile spread across my face. I did not need to know. I did not need another jackpot. I did not need the thrill of the gamble or the promise of sudden life-changing wealth. I gently folded the unplayed scratch-off ticket directly in half and casually tossed it into the small, polished chrome trash bin nestled beside my seat. I pressed the silver call button on my armrest. The flight attendant appeared almost instantly. "May I bring you something before we reach our cruising altitude?" "Ms. Vance?" she asked politely. "Yes, please," I replied calmly, leaning back and watching the city lights disappear far below. "I would like a glass of your finest vintage champagne." She nodded and returned moments later with a beautiful crystal flute filled with bubbling golden liquid. I took the delicate glass, feeling the cool crystal against my skin. I raised it slightly in a silent, solitary toast to the quiet cabin, to the endless dark sky stretching outside my window, and to the brilliant, beautiful future waiting for me. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. It tasted perfect. I had already won everything.